All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just a few bits of housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded, so that recording will be sent out to you via email after we end. We will be answering questions at the end, so feel free to use the Q&A function. And thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Mackey. I'm a client director with IDP Connect. If you aren't familiar with IDP, we are a global leader in international education solutions across digital marketing, data consulting, and student counseling. And I'm joined today by a truly talented panel of IEM experts, and I'll let them introduce themselves. So our experts, Marty, if you'd like to kick us off and introduce yourself, and we'll go around table.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Marty Bennett, Director of Global Recruitment and Partnerships at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Sam?
Hi, Sarah, Marty. Thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Samrat Rai Chaudhary. You just call me Sam. That's what I'm known by. And I'm with Webster University. I'm the AVP for International Enrollment.
And Rafi.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and I'm so glad to join Marty and Sam in this panel. My name is Rafi Moroy. I'm the Director of International Missions here at Suffolk University, located in the city of Boston.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we're here today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, challenges, trends, and best practices for student recruitment. A lot has happened in the world over the past year, so let's just jump right in and start with challenges. We know that international recruitment and admissions offices are up against a number of challenges this year, and some of those are internal. Our partner universities are reporting staffing shortages and budget cuts amidst increased student demand, which can be challenging to deal with. And then many of those challenges are external, with things like inflation and the strength of the US dollar, rising competition among destination countries, and then visa lag times at US consulates, all cited as a concern. So what do you see as the greatest challenge to international student recruitment in 2023? Who wants to kick us off?
Sure, I'll get started. What I've really felt this past year is getting our balance right in terms of our recruitment methods. Coming out of the pandemic, where we were forced to go full virtual if we didn't have a good ground game in country with agents and other partners, I think a lot of us are figuring out what that balance is. So, we've at UNLV, we've decided to go, because it's just me right now doing the recruitment side of things internationally as we're building our program. Our challenge is really finding the time. Fortunately, we have staff on the international side, grad and undergrad, that do the admissions processing that can step up and be part of virtual fairs. So we've done a series of virtual fairs, but we haven't been able to fully hit the ground running with in-country recruitment yet. And that's something we hope to do in the coming fall term for the first time at UNLV, because we've been growing from basically no ground game to hopefully a full ground game in the next year.
What about you, Rafi?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Marty. I guess to answer this question, I will divide it up into what you have kind of modeled it, Sarah. Between internal and external factors. For us internally, I guess we're privileged or we're lucky enough, not privileged, but that we didn't lose any staff. We do have a dedicated team of about 3 people, and then the graduate admissions team who also do dedicated international admissions. So we were able to hold on to talent, and I guess experience from that sense. But internally, Suffolk has had a long-standing mission of internationalization. So lucky for me, I guess, and for us involved in international missions, it is part of the mission, and it's something that is something that we have continued to do, and that's something that I would encourage everyone to always make sure that it becomes a priority. But with that, I think also has come some internal challenges here that recovering from the pandemic has been hard. We have had drops in a number of different, and in some ways I see it as a dichotomy of 2 realities. Some departments are actually doing quite well internationally, but then that comes with the whole idea of too many international students from one country, visa lag times, and and their class rosters go out of whack. So that has presented a little bit of itself and the challenges, while other faculty and other departments kind of saying, oh, I don't see as many as you guys used to. So all of that pressure, of course, is coming back to us, which I guess relates to the external factors. We have been seeing even pre-pandemic, still a recovery effort in terms of applicants and increase and students applying to university. There has been some increases on particularly the graduate side, but I feel like there's a lot of course economic unrest, economic situations all over the world that are affecting. We are having a lot more conversations about merit and scholarships and what we could do to counterbalance that. So and I envision that continuing for still this season, next season, and those coming up. Sorry, a bit long-winded, but that's from our perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think recalibrating has been a huge challenge as people are getting back on the ground. And I'm hearing a lot of clients talk about an increase in applications, which is great, but I think conversion is a big question mark, and there's just a lot going on. So Samrat, I'm interested to hear from you on the topic.
So, I mean, we are in a very different, I would say, scale and scope in terms of our overall operations, because when you look at Webster, we have locations across the globe. We have 9 locations internationally. We have, even within the United States, quite a lot of locations, and we focus pretty much in St. Louis, our home campus. So I'll give that as a perspective, but we are seeing a lot of activity in our Florida as well as our Texas location. The reason I'm giving you this background is that we were always resourced to pull resources, not just within our office here in St. Louis, but across the world, in doing stuff like processing admissions decisions, for example, because all those campuses also have the equal opportunity for reviewing the decisions. The only part that are unique to us that we have to do here pretty much is that of the DSO. And that is where the internal challenge I see the most. During the COVID year, I mean, for example, Webster right now, we are at a 450% growth on an average term to term. This spring, we had about 600% growth. So these are exponential numbers. Everybody is good, but you can imagine with conversion ratios down, you actually had to offer a lot more I-20s and everything. And finding a DSO, a qualified DSO, is increasingly challenging, because after COVID, a lot of those folks have found other jobs to move on. And that is one thing that I want to pinpoint. And I think our audience is a mix of universities as well as agencies. So you got to kind of keep that in mind, that these processes will take longer, and with growth, which I believe, I'm a very big believer that this growth is not a one-off kind, and it will grow. So you need to pay attention to your admission side of things and delivery, and set up a team of compliance officers and DSOs. That's the challenge which we see, because it just doesn't stop at the point the student come through your door. You got to handhold them till they pretty much graduate. So you need to make sure that you have the staff growing, not just in your enrollment areas, but in other areas for providing student services, providing compliance, like, simple things like finding the right officers who will deal with the OPT and the STEM OPT, because you're talking about a 5-year engagement and not just a 2-year engagement with the student. So that's one thing where we are seeing a challenge to find qualified professionals who we need to maintain the growth. Now, for me, if you ask the biggest challenge, that is external, and that has nothing to do with admissions. Graduate student market is growing, and I think the biggest challenge for us will be the housing and to find accommodation for international students. It is a shame that even with our growth and with every intention, students are coming. It's great, but it's a shame that they are not finding the exact apartment or a living place that they're staying. It is not, I think we will not be the only institution where you find like 5 students living in a 2-bedroom apartment or something worse. And they are very price conscious markets, especially from the graduate students. So even if you revamp and you do it the way you want it at American university, the market is not responding in the same way. So I find that this is going to be a very big challenge if we continue to grow in this same rate, and I'm not talking about just Webster, but I think for US higher ed and international enrollment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've had a lot of conversations over the last year or so about scaling growth, and not just in, as you mentioned, you know, our IEM offices are focused on bringing students in, but making sure they have adequate housing, and are those wraparound support services needed to retain those students and ensure that they graduate there. And I think that's definitely a work in progress. We've seen a number of articles coming out of Canada about the housing problem, and I think the UK as well in general.
Australia.
So definitely Australia, yeah, it's a major concern, I think, for a lot of institutions, multiple campuses, and dealing with trying to scale growth evenly across campuses is another concern we've been hearing. So really, really great feedback. Let's move on to strategies and best practices. So as Marty mentioned, you're not back on the road yet, but many universities are getting back on the road after nearly 2 years. But amidst increased competition, a lot of them are also diversifying their strategies. So they're investing in digital marketing, increasingly working with agents, and then considering hiring in-country representatives as well. What do you view as one essential best practice for recruitment success this year?
Well, I'd step back to that last question, and you were just at the end there talking about all the add-on services that we need to be focusing on, because I always think the best recruitment strategy is one where you're showing the fruits of their future success to them. And that means having data, that means having anecdotal stories, video testimonials from alumni and your current students that can share how well they are doing on your campus and why they've invested in an education at your institution and are seeing the fruits of that after they graduate. And so much of that isn't just capturing the stories. That's great if you can get to that point, but if you don't have quality services in place and a really unified approach across campus from prospect to alumni, that includes all the different offices that these students are going to interact with on our college campuses, I think that's the missed opportunity. And that's what I always say when I was a consultant before I joined UNLV. This is one of my philosophies I always share with them is if you're not encouraging your on-campus offices that are dealing with international students, from housing to advising to student employment to career services to alumni, to all have services and plans in place to meet the needs of your international students, not just international students, but all students, your first gen students, other DEI students that might have specific needs. If you're not meeting those needs throughout their journey, you're not really fulfilling your promise to them on the front end, saying how great you are as an institution and how well employed you're going to be on the back end. So I think if you don't take a full campus-wide approach, and that's something I'm very happy to report that we've adopted at UNLV, is that our senior vice provost, who oversees our international efforts, she's made it a priority for the campus to say, hey, we're all in on international. We were all in on diversity for our first gen students, for other groups that we've identified as priority for the university, but we have to be all in on all of them. And we can't just say everyone with an accent go to the international student office. It just doesn't work that way. I've been on too many campuses where that was the default response. So when you have a campus that's fully united in terms of recognizing the individual needs of the students that they're dealing with, and can provide the success stories on the back end, then that's the best recruitment practice you can ever adopt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's all interconnected, right? So you have to have those holistic services in place, because it all wraparounds. We know word of mouth is really crucial to recruitment. We know peer-to-peer is really a trusted and reliable way we can engage with prospective students. So if current students aren't having a good time, if they're not completing, if they're not transferring out, not only is it not great for them, but it's not great for your IEM team as well. Rafi or Samrat, what do you have to add to Marty's thoughts?
Well, in terms of best practices, one of the things that I was going to point out is, we certainly have engaged in a lot of different efforts of multiple touch points and being able to, connect as much as possible with students. Yes, I understand there's a lot of noise out there, and there's, we are all competing for sort of, that 1 second of attention that our email or our something is being looked at. But that's, I think, where, the digital efforts, the efforts of trying to gain, lead generators, and all those those things that sometimes, partners that you can engage with who are becoming helpful. Some of those are maybe more engaged in at the guidance council at the school level. That I don't want to give names because obviously it's not our place to do so. But all these different types of efforts that I think are important for that. And one of the things that we certainly also engaged in, and we did this pre-pandemic, but certainly looking through that type is examining your admissions policies and admissions there. And what I mean by this is do you have a sophisticated enough, and for lack of a better word, process that takes into account the different scenarios that students might be in that you can take advantage of. I'm talking about sometimes international curriculums, and maybe you can offer waivers of English proficiency or other things that might help you again, almost like give this message of welcoming, of being able to be accessible without of course, jeopardizing your own admissions standards. And again, the services that you can or cannot provide. To Marty's point of view, if obviously I'm not saying lowering your standards to a point that it makes it impossible to serve those students. They may not be bad students, but maybe need a lack of English proficiency or something that you're comfortable with. But those I think are best practices that for us have helped throughout the years to sort of not having a very rigid admissions process also that sometimes doesn't allow to for certain applicants are out there that that you may be able to actually take them or invite them into or yield them, I guess.
Absolutely. And I know we have some marketing folks on the call, and we will get to kind of messaging and some of those multiple touch point opportunities a little bit later in our conversation. But one of the things that struck me that you said, a lot of people on the call are considering different tactics or strategies to engaging prospective students. And I think really understanding where your challenges are in your funnel is really important, but also understanding where you're inadvertently putting barriers for students to complete applications, for students to not confirm. There are often so many inadvertent barriers to just finalizing an application or finalizing a confirmation or getting to campus. And the more you can kind of work through those processes, the better. Sam, what are your thoughts on that?
So, I mean, I could possibly go on this topic for a long time. So give me a time check, okay, guys? Warning. So, I mean, when I looked at this question and when I thought about it, I think we want to talk a little bit more about what are some recruiting best practices that we are thinking. And I think specifics to what we are seeing in the demographics of students that we are getting currently, I'll restrict to that for now. And a lot of our students come through agents. And I think it is important for the institutions to find ways to communicate regularly with the agencies in finding ways that the messages that you are sending from the institution and all that are important and are there are also passed on to the agents, not only at the point of where they're like ready to leave, but through every stages. So transparency and the messaging is important. And talking about best practices, the ways we do is that we, for example, are now Zoom, because of the advent of Zoom and it being so popular, we do something called the, for example, every month we do an Admit Day event, which is very popular US concept, but we do it now for internationals over Zoom. And this allows us to speak to those students who have applied through agencies, even though they are, I mean, agencies are sometimes very skeptical about introducing the student too early into the pipeline to a university. And we understand, we get that there are lots of confusion and lots of scare and fear. So, but it is important for you to work with agencies who are open to that and who are not, guiding or shielding the students from getting information. And I'm not going to say that that all agencies do that, and certainly, I mean, as an example, IDB is fantastic with its transparency in the way they communicate. We do so many sessions with you, but that's not happening for everyone. There's a lot of information that doesn't go through, because the agencies pick and choose what they want to share with the students. And as an example, if we have sent an arrival guide where we are talking about a lot of essentials, like how to pack your bags, what to bring, and if that agency felt that the only thing they wanted to pass on to the student was their offer letter and their I-20 because they're dealing with volume, it just defeats the purpose of the whole pre-arrival communication. So best practices, find a way to reach to your students before they come to the United States as much as possible. The other thing related to that, and as an example of what Webster did, we get a lot of students from India, for example, or Nepal, and a lot from Southeast Asia, a lot from South Asia. So starting last year, when things opened up, we are also doing some in-person pre-departure orientations. And we are very thankful to Education USA for providing us some help with even sending their officers to our private events and doing a pre-arrival departure, not to promote the university, because these are all people who had visas and everything done. But we are talking to the students because I feel that they need the information before they come to America. And the more you work with agencies which are more, I would say, suitable and understands this, it is important. So I'm saying a lot of things I know together, but these are all connected. You got to be very picky about who you work with. It is very easy to take the shorter route and have 300 agents in India or in Nepal or in Bangladesh who will all send you one student each. You may not be able to even serve them because you will not have staffing to support that. So rather than that, work with 4 or 5 big and then work with them continuously in improving the communication, because I feel that is the most important way that you can put your act together.
Absolutely. You have to have a certain amount of internal infrastructure in place before you begin to start engaging with different partners or service providers, and clear expectations and communication lines once you have those relationships established. Thank you all. I think we're going to move on to diversification, which is always a hot topic. So we think that India is poised to soon overtake China as the #1 sending country, but there are also many other countries where we're seeing positive growth trends year over year. What markets are you watching this year, and what role does diversification play in your overall strategy?
Yeah, it's the question, right? Everybody for so long has been dependent on India and China, or China over India. And as you say, China this year, probably as of, I think maybe even as early as this most recent CVIS by the numbers report, I think the numbers from the fall reports show that there was only about a 15,000 student gap between China and India. China was still ahead, but I think that's easily going to be overtaken, if not in January, certainly in the fall. Just because the numbers are moving in opposite directions right now for India and China. Hearing reports out of India, 600,000 studied abroad this past year. That might double or triple in the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, that the capacity for India to grow is just incredible in terms of their outbound flows. But now they're also going to be taking inbound students when they have, if the UGC ever allows the campuses to start, U.S. campuses and other foreign universities to set up shop. But in terms of diversification from a UNLV perspective, as I mentioned, we did not have any strategy before they set up this, my office and our new global education initiatives unit before this past May. There was not that structure in place. So what we got was organic. It was China, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. And what we've realized is we're missing the boat on a lot of obvious connections that we have with where we are in the United States in the Southwest. We have huge Hispanic populations in our area that have migrated to the region. We have the Mexican consulate in Las Vegas. There's natural ties there culturally to Latin America that we have never really exploited or invested in. And that's part of what the challenge is. Those who have recruited in Latin America will know it's not the kind of market where, unlike India, Nepal, China, where you can go in, sign agreements, and then the next year you could have 50, 60, 100 students coming from that country or that agent. It's not that kind of a market. And it's very relationship driven and long-term driven. And in certain countries, the demand might not be there right away for degree programs. You might have to start with short-term programs, summer programs, and then build up. And that's something we've realized as we've invested in Mexico and a couple of other countries that we're going to be traveling to in the next year. But for us, diversification means not just India, South Asia, and Latin America, but looking where we have other strengths. In Saudi Arabia, the government's changed their scholarship format several times recently, and now there are these niche scholarships. And one of those niches that we fit very perfectly at UNLV is hospitality. They have this Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia that is driving a lot of their educational efforts and where they're sending students. And one of those is for hospitality tourism programs. So we have the #1 program in the US. So we're going to be seeing hundreds literally over the next 4 to 5 years coming to Las Vegas for degree programs, bachelor's, master's, doctoral level programs to be able to run those businesses and tourist outputs back in the kingdom. So that's a market that we're investing in heavily. Africa is an up and coming market for everybody. We saw the SEC schools do a tour there this past fall. And I'm sure a lot of my colleagues were eager to say, oh, we should be getting there too. We really need to organize ourselves. And we're seeing application growth in countries in Africa that we've not seen before. The yield is fairly low, and that's always been the challenge, I think, in Africa. Ethiopia has jumped off the charts this year for us for some reason. But what we're needing to do is that back end support and making sure if we don't have established agents in country that are proven successful, and we don't have a track record yet at UNLV with any of them. But if we don't have agents in country that can be helpful, we're directing those applicants to Education USA because they have a much better success rate on the visa side than do the average agent in Nigeria, perhaps. So this is something that is really important for us as we develop those markets that we can invest in 2 or 3 in Africa in the next year and say, okay, here's some real concrete steps we can take to build our presence, establish brand recognition, which we don't have in most of the world outside of the existing markets where we do have students. So that's a real plus for us in terms of how we're getting support to do it and invest in limited markets. And if I make the case, I can get the funding to go do the events or make the right connections for us to be able to establish that presence that we need.
Sarah, can I go second for this one? If
Absolutely, absolutely, go for it.
Just because it's so connected to what we were talking about and great insights. Well, for Webster, like we are once again very privileged to have campuses across the globe, and that means that we have our recruiting and admissions staff. Like these are all campuses owned pretty much by Webster, so this is not like in with another universities. Most of them are with us. So we are able to recruit across the globe, and even then, there are the word diversity for us is a lot more than just that. I mean, even within India, we are looking at how can we diversify beyond Hyderabad, for example, because a lot of people come from the south of India. I mean, nothing wrong. I mean, I love Hyderabadi biryanis. I love to go to Hyderabad. But I wished I could go and get a student from Kashmir or from Punjab or from Jalandhar. So internally also there is scope. But what I wanted to kind of piggyback on this conversation was that in terms of actual diversity of students, I think what my perspective, and this is mine only, this is undergraduate, you can diversify a lot more, but graduate remains to what kind of is the realistic push towards the numbers. All I'm trying to say is that you cannot offset the number of students coming from India and China together in large proportions within the rest of the world, because European students do not necessarily come to our type of an institution, a liberal arts private university in the Midwest. They wouldn't come that much unless and until it's a study abroad program for a semester abroad. So those kinds of things might plug in. We have a study abroad program amidst our network of students. So most of our students would come from there. Our WINS partners, we have 150 different institutions in the US who partner. So they send students to our other campuses. So that kind of graduate diversity is okay. But undergraduate is where I think we are going to put more of our focus in terms of getting back those numbers. And once again, embassies last year, still, I don't think we're operating fully, because we offered a lot of I-20s, and a lot of them reported that they couldn't even get an appointment in the embassies, including countries in Africa. I mean, we have students from Ghana who had to travel in some other location for an appointment or vice versa. So it was very complex. So I think most of the focus for this year, we will do an undergraduate as a conscious choice. And we are also very keen to look at the diversity in terms of, like, Central Asia as a region. Because we are seeing that the Georgia, the Kazakh, the Uzbek, and all those things, we think with the situation evolving around in Russia, a lot of inbound Russia market will be diverted to other countries. And UK is kind of like, yeah, coming in, coming out. Australia, we don't know what's happening. So we think a lot of students from that region are now kind of like looking into United States as an option. And this is an area region that we would like to focus in addition to the usuals.
Yeah, I think we could have a whole next webinar on diversity, right? I think there's a lot to it. It's diversification, like you mentioned, not just by country, but by region, by program, by level. And then to Marty's point, each market involves different challenges, different strategies that you need to employ. And that often requires a different level of investment that I found that institutions are not necessarily willing to make long-term. We can't, convincing the folks that control the budget that the returns might be a lot longer and a lot smaller for certain areas of the world than we've seen is a challenge.
Yeah, sorry to cut in, but one thing I would say that we use with IDP, the IDP Connect services, and we restrict the markets to these diversity kind of areas. So our IDP leads do not come from India, Nepal, China, because we already get them. But then if you have something like that, and then if you have somebody who is dedicated to following it up, that might be a low-lying fruit as a strategy. And IDP didn't pay me for saying this, so I'm just hoping that we'll get a discount next time we are renewing that.
Noted, Sam, noted. Well, let's move on. I want to talk in hand with our conversation around diversity. It involves data. So how do you use data to drive your strategy? What data points are most useful to you as you're working on your strategic plan? I find, and I have an institutional background myself, and there's a lot of data. It takes time to rifle through your data and try to figure out what points are actually helpful. So how do you wrap your head around data, and how do you use it to inform your strategy? And I'll start with Rafi on this one.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And that's just very quickly, I just want to say something very quickly, because a lot of really good points were made by Marty and Sam on diversification. But I just wanted to say that for us, for Suffolk, it is key. It is one part of our missions. I mean, we are lucky to have been able to keep, it was as high as, I think, 100 countries, but now we're down to 95 countries representing student body. But it is actually the saved us, not saved us, sorry, that's not a word, but it helped us when we saw, the decrease in China, the decrease in Saudi Arabia, and some of those other areas, because it still kept the percentage of national students at a good level. So I think it is something that everyone needs to talk about. And in terms of us particularly, looking at countries that we're paying attention was, of course, India has been a very great source of students, but we're looking at other areas that we suddenly have popped up, like Pakistan. Nigeria has suddenly been a good producer. In Latin America also, absolutely. Venezuela has always still kept for us, a good level of students coming in from there. Yeah, well, I'm not talking hundreds, but still that the diversification factor helps the overall number. But going to your question about key data, I think that is part of the mission that we have in the enrollment management division at Suffolk, to sort of guide our decisions as to where we're going, where we're putting a little bit of the investment money. So what sources? I mean, everything, but I would certainly say that with a lot of the digital, companies or vendors that we have solicited, there always is a what's the word I'm looking for anyhow, like a headquarter, or like, the main central place that we can kind of take a look at your specific leads and your specific, points of interest, or, the areas that you're seeing activity for. Of course, I think it's important to always have a powerful CRM that tracks your applications and is able to give you that year-to-year comparison, to being able to do that, including identifying, the subset of what the source of the countries are. And what I mean by this is, for us, for example, here in Boston, but certainly here in Suffolk, domestic international students, meaning those sourced out of your country. Sometimes we see a number of students, by citizenship, where are they coming from? And you think, oh, I need to go to China, a lot, because but for us, it's like half of them came from the US. We never had to leave our background, and our domestic team has to be involved in these efforts to sort of, help out with the area. So I think data is very important as a key component as to where you're spending your dollars, because of course it's not infinite. And I think we all suffer with a lot of, restrictive budgets that will only allow us to do certain amount of things.
Marty and Sam, any thoughts on data you wish you had that you don't, how you kind of integrate it?
Yeah, for us at UNLV, having good data internally can sometimes be a challenge if you've never really spent a lot of time thinking about it as an institution, and how you track and who counts as an international. Do we count just our Fs and Js, or do we count the other alphabet soup of folks that we might get as dependents, or maybe sons or daughters of performers at Cirque du Soleil on the Strip that might be want to come to the university for study? That could be. We still don't know really who we're counting. We have very different definitions. So that's something that we really need to get our house in order first, straight on that data side, before we start going out and making huge, wild, outlandish decisions on where we spend money. But what I do use data from sources like IDP and others out there that do regular student surveys, the insights reports that IDP does regularly. That provides me ammunition to make the case to administration why we need to, say, for example, be highlighting career outcomes for our student graduates, because particularly at the undergrad level, parents of students, if not the students themselves, are intensely focused on those outcomes, particularly post-pandemic, when not everybody has gained financially during the pandemic. Most have suffered somewhat, and some more than others, and they become increasingly price sensitive in terms of where they're going, how much they're going to be willing to spend on their son or daughter's higher education. So that might mean, okay, well, I'm going to be dropping $250,000 over the next 4 or 5 years at this institution. What am I getting for it? Where's the proof of the pudding? Right? What percent of the international students graduate and have jobs within 3 months of graduation? And that's the kind of data that most schools don't really have. Could they have career services data that says, oh, 90% of our students are employed within 6 months of graduation in their field of study? Yeah, that's great. But how many of your international students are actually securing OPT in their field? And obviously it has to be in their field of study for OPT. So more of those better internal data tracking will help us down the road once we get our act together and can say, okay, yeah, we had 150 students graduate in engineering this past year, and X number of those had jobs in their field within 2-3 months of graduation. So getting that data internally oftentimes it can be a bigger challenge than just knowing what the trends are out in the market.
So I'll just be very brief, because I know we have a couple of others to catch, and we are running out of time. We have an institutional effectiveness unit that, for us, like most of other schools, tracks the data. And we are very fortunate that Webster, being like internationalized almost for 50 years, that we have overseas campuses, we have a huge advantage in terms of how we have access to the data, how we are structured. It's not foolproof, but I've been very blessed with the data that I can see. Now, some of the things that you asked a question, what is the data that I would want to see that I don't see right now, is, there's a lot of information in the service record and in the US visa approval rates and things like that. And I wish I had some data, something solid, to understand something better about all this information that is outside of our control. Like how many visas, let's say, if they will be issued per year, or what is the growth expected, then I would not necessarily issue 500,000 offer letters if I know that I do not need to worry about it and do the resources. So I think some of the data of the past years of, let's say, I-20s issued versus how many of them went to an interview, we cannot see that on our screen. We only can see visa acceptance, but we can't see visa rejection, for example, in the service record. So those kinds of information, if we had, would be lovely, but this is not the forum. I'm sure that my team members are somewhere shouting and yelling and requesting and begging and pleading for this data from USCIS and other DHS people. From our standpoint of data, I think we are pretty good. We're looking solid, but I totally agree with the rest of our panelists here that you sometimes can have data and it might not mean that you go with the direction of the data. Like, for example, you see your data analytics program is growing 300% and you hire 25 new professors thinking that will be it. I don't think during the pandemic has taught us one thing, but be data informed, but don't be too data driven. You got to still like do that wait and watch and be a little bit not jump guns too fast, but just because the numbers are exponential. So be careful about that is my advice.
Right. There's a lot of nuance behind the data. So understanding that nuance can sometimes be just as important as having the data and integrating it into your strategy. Well, I want to round out our conversation by touching a little bit on content and messaging. So we know that Gen Z has different buyer behavior from the millennial generation in a few key areas. The data tells us that on a whole, Gen Z is more pragmatic, they're more focused on return on investment, they're less brand loyal, and they're often more influenced by social and digital media when making decisions. We also know, I think Marty touched on how important career outcomes and postgraduate work options are as one of the factors that drive their decision-making. So how are you meeting the unique needs of Gen Z when you promote your institution, and how do you speak to things like ROI and career outcomes in your messaging? It's a big question, I know.
Well, go ahead, Sammy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, we use certain platforms where we put the students in contact with with future students. So we have a team of what we call Gorlock guides. The Gorlock is our mascot, and they are basically student ambassadors equivalent, and they work for our admissions office at various capacity and role. Their messaging is very organic. They are not scripted. We give them some guidelines of what the questions should be, but they chat with these students in a pretty much in a very different way in groups and things as far as this. I mean, we use certain softwares. I'm hopeful you guys don't mind mentioning the name of Unibuddy, for example, as an example of peer-to-peer chat, where it's a very different platform that we are looking at. And these are still like in theory developing. So we don't know if it's going to hold and stick, and we are experimenting with some of these, but connecting the students together works best, number one. Number two is that we bring in our career services folks to our admit day events that I was talking about before. So they ask questions and we give them those analysis and demands and things like that. We base a lot. Gen Z is very curious about the financial outcomes, and you will see it. That's a trend for the US as well as the others. So we track our OPT, CPT outcomes. So for example, we track what percentage of our international students did an OPT. And this is really, if you ask your DSO, they can pull it out of their record in a minute. They should have that right away as to how many students came and how many went for OPT. So giving these numbers and these things, even if it is for us, it's 85, 90%. We don't know if this will be higher or lower with this growth, but that is more factual. So that you have to give something that is factual. They also look at, like, a lot of people back in the outside of the United States might not know what Glassdoor is, for example, or might not know what Indeed is. They might know about monster.com and stuff like that. But so giving them some of the ideas of what, for example, we were talking about cybersecurity as a program, and we showed that how many jobs in cybersecurity, according to third-party sources, are available in the United States. So giving them relevant data that they can research and then not be too pushy with your, oh, my students all go and work at Google and things like that. That generation is gone. So giving them the direction to where to do the research and then letting them find is much better than pushing a salesy, like here is my record, here is my data. That's my perspective.
Yeah, definitely peer-to-peer and that authentic messaging, I think, is really key. And I don't mind you mentioning Unibuddy, because IDP and Unibuddy are partnered together, and Unibuddy is integrated into our system. So Marty and
Fantastic.
Rafi, do you want to offer your thoughts on this?
Well, meeting students where they are is absolutely essential, and we all know that they're on social. And you need to look no further than where do students search for information on colleges and universities beyond IDP sites and hot courses sites? They go to TikTok and they do searches for colleges, and that should scare us quite a bit. So, fortunately, we're in a state where TikTok is still allowed. As a public university, that's not always the case. 27 states have banned that now, TikTok on public universities, in terms of using it as a recruitment tool or marketing on university devices. So for us, we are in a state where we have both a UNLV TikTok team as well as an admissions TikTok team. So we're leveraging them. We're also part in the next college tour series, the TV series that's been on Amazon. We're being featured in the next iteration of that. So those episodes are being recorded right now. So we're going to be leveraging that quite heavily in our and we have a couple of international students in the mix there. So really excited about that and being able to use some of that data, use some of that content that we can then share out to our future students, because we don't have a lot of it right now because we didn't have anything. So that's our challenge.
Yeah, it's short anecdote. I had when I was at the University of Cincinnati, we had a student come in, and I asked them, well, what made you choose Cincinnati? Just like, honestly, I just fell in love with your TikTok. And I was like, thanks for the compliment. Probably not the best route to choose your university, but those things do matter. Rafi.
Well, I'm just going to say very quickly, because all of these are excellent points. But to us, we have a lot of these discussions with our marketing folks, and they help us guide our, what to use, what to do. And I would say just a few things, short videos, things that attract a lot of the attention has been something that we have been certainly focusing. And in terms of the ROI, yes, I absolutely agree. I mean, this generation and families also, who are many times the big influencers in the decision, are asking those questions. So you better have a very good, solid answer and solid information that you can provide. I think focusing also on the idea of we're preparing students for careers that don't exist, that careers that never existed in the past, or that are developing in this area, but also with a tint that we have found, or at least we think that the Gen Z does look for a mission-driven career. It's not just about your career. It's not just about you're going to make all this money, or you're going to launch a business. It's mission-driven, and thus adding a little bit of those elements for that, because ROI, I think, for them is also about purpose, and going beyond just whatever great next app they're going to develop, or or business they're going to have.
Absolutely. I think like that authentic connection to your university and is part of that, right? That's mission forward, mission first. This has all been really great. I feel like we have had a lot of really great talking points and a great discussion, and I want to move it over to a Q&A. I know we have quite a few questions. I don't know we'll have time for them all, but I wanted to start with a few. I'd like this one. What advice do you have for small schools just starting out recruiting international students?
Well, for me, I'm just starting out at UNLV in the past year, so we didn't have a strategy, so we didn't have a lot of data that we could rely on. We fortunately had a base of students that we could start doing focus groups with and finding out some of their core reasons for choosing the university, and that's where I would start. Is what resonates best with your current international students, if you have any, that are the reasons they chose your institution, and kind of build on that and identify not only where they're from, how did they get to you through direct US means, if they were at another school, transferred in from high school or whatever, or if they came direct from overseas. Knowing that kind of data about who you have on campus now as some of those main reasons they chose you, not just the institutional reasons that marketing communications always wants to get out there, because they may be and are different for international students. Because one of our value props at UNLV is value, and that we have for low tuition very low tuition for in-state. You can basically go for free if you're in-state. But even out of state, there's significant financial aid. But none of that really applies to the international audience because we don't have well-defined scholarships yet for international students. So the value proposition isn't the same for a domestic student as it is for an international student. So it's adapting your messaging for your institution to your international audience so that it may need chopping and changing, or it may need to be altogether different if you're trying to be effective in reaching the kind of students you already have, or if there's a completely different set of students, then you have to understand what that messaging needs to be to reach them. Build small though, start small. Yeah.
Sam or Rafi, anything to add on if you were a small school, where would you start?
I would just say very quickly, like try to make this a institutional priority, because you are going to need this investment that that needs to come with it. But maybe like I was mentioning earlier, sometimes start looking at what can be done quickly within your own backyard, within your own area, within stuff that your domestic team is already doing, and then moving forward to sort of trying to get into different digital opportunities, as well as hopefully also in-person travel, which sometimes can be a big push in terms of financial resources.
Perfect. This kind of goes hand in hand with that question, and it's targeted to Marty. So I'd like to have Marty answer, but if Sam and Rafi have something to add, along with, just starting out, what kind of infrastructure did you need to implement UNLV's international recruitment efforts? So the questioner mentions brochures, web content, application processing, document verification. There's a lot there. But what were the most important key pieces of internal infrastructure that needed to be put in place?
Yeah, and that was one of the things we identified early on when I was consulting, is that we had one person whose job I eventually took when she left the university, is we didn't have time or resources to dedicate individuals to go do recruitment travel yet. So my travel in the past year has been the influencer travel. It's meeting with the conferences where I know potential partner institutions will be, where agents or international ACAC, where I could talk to guidance counselors overseas that could be influencers for us, because we were trying to establish brand recognition in markets that we hadn't really had presence in before. So that required a lot of not direct recruitment, establishing our agent network, a lot of hand-holding there to get that off the ground. Talking about the communication process, Sam, you mentioned this earlier. When you have agents, how do you keep them informed about what's going on? One of the first things we did this fall is we started a partner newsletter that goes out each month to all of our agents, all of our partner universities, that explains top news and events, new academic programs coming online, resources section where they can download a copy of our most recent slide deck or our informational brochure that we have. And we've had to build all that from scratch, really. We have basically one presentation for both undergrad and grad. We have one back and front flyer that has all of our majors and some of our promotional facts on it. That's all we have right now for promotional materials. So we have to build slowly, because we can't do it all overnight, all at once. So for us, it's the infrastructure has been me, but it has helped since we've reorganized in May to have one unit where all of us in the international space talk to each other regularly every week. And so I'm keeping our international student scholar office informed about what's coming down the pike, what our expected numbers are, so that they can start planning. They might have to hire a new advisor for the next year because of what's coming down the pike. So they know that. Working with our study abroad program, where we're working with they work through a consortium to send our students abroad, but now that consortium also wants to send students from their partner universities for degree studies. So we're kind of working a backward flow for that, not just students coming for exchange, but actually coming for degree programs, and how do we work them into the flow. So having all of our international folks together in one unit does help quite a bit in terms of communication, and also with our outside partners, making sure they're always kept in the loop as to what's going on campus.
Right.
They feel a part of the team.
And that harkens back to Rafi's point, looking at kind of what your internal processes and resources are already established and seeing how those can be just kind of tweaked and improved, better communication flows, better personalization for international students. There are likely already a lot of resources that you already have in place to serve students, and how can we kind of facilitate that towards an international focus. I'm going to round off with our last question. I think we've talked about how important it is getting in front of students. Most people probably on this call are not from top 50, top 25 universities, and we're all kind of vying for attention. And part of that is your marketing efforts. So what are your opinions for best practices or best strategies in digital marketing?
I guess we were all like thinking
I'm gonna hop in at once.
area, but it's a tough question, I think, because you know, like is there some golden, you know, tool that we all can use? And no, I think it's maybe, lack of a better word, diversifying a little bit of also your efforts as much as possible to sort of, you know, try to again, it's going to be impossible to break through all of the noise, but, you know, at least try to, you know, give into the different areas. So I think you definitely need something that would be a good lead generator, you know, to sort of, you know, start putting some attention. There are digital marketing efforts that maybe bring down more to the, you know, to the level of the college counselor, the school, you know, that you might be able to you know, get some attention in that effort. I guess also looking at all different streams of social media where you can sort of try. I mean, let's all remember the Great China Firewall, you know, and thus having, you know, your WeChat, your Weibo, your all these other efforts that that might be beneficial for you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's a straight answer, but those are the things, some of the things that I can think about.
So, I mean, of course, I don't think my company policy allows me to give away secrets, but I'll try to kind of like, you know, give something that is right out there and for people to know. I think, you know, being more focused to the target audience rather than spending your dollars on a you know, anyone who can you can find is the key. Because lead generation is one thing, and being very specific and focused on quality leads is important. So I think in terms of digital marketing, I think I use the word digital communications for a reason. The groups have moved to those WhatsApps, TikToks, and stuffs like that. So it's a lot of social media marketing and social media oriented marketing. I'm still trying to figure out how ChatGPT types of stuffs are. I'm surprised that no questions were about ChatGPT and how it is positive or disruptive to marketing. But we are in an era of Zooms and ChatGPTs and, you know, these social media. So most of that is below the line marketing. So we don't do newspaper ads. We do not do television ads internationally. We never used to possibly do that. But there are lots of these kinds of things that are happening that will continue to grow. Putting students in contact with one another through all of these would be important. And last but not least, everything should be in the website and format of non-print, because if you have a lot of print brochures and stuffs like that, that is kind of like tying it in. Do not use that too much beyond just specific to an event, because your information is changing so fast and so quick. You don't want the old school practices of what used to be marketing so much. Focus on SEO, it really helps. Focus on I would say microsites specific to a location, languages specific to the location. Buying behaviors recommend that most parents get involved in undergrad recruiting, and they might not all have excellent English language skills. So having them translated in some format or all digitally, once again, would be key marketing strategies and techniques to really focus on your audience.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of different routes you can take, whether you do things in-house, whether you outsource a lot of this work to a company. I know one of the questions was on niche programs. And if you're really looking at program specific work, retargeting can be very effective. But the point is we can't do this without some element of digital and social media engagement. That's where Gen Z is. And we have to, as Marty said, meet them where they're at. And I recognize we are now at 3:01. So I want to thank everyone for attending. I hope this was a fruitful discussion for you and helpful as you go about thinking about your international strategic plan for fall 2023. And I want to thank our panelists again for joining us. So have a lovely rest of your afternoon, everyone. See you.
Thank you.